with Digicom Canada.
And I'm Jeff Wiener with Digicom.
Today we'd like to lead you through Preferred Edition Small Community Network and the resiliency options that are available in 9.1. Jeff, correct me if I'm wrong on any of these.
All right.
First of all, I'm going to just draw some sites here. VAN for Vancouver, CAL for Calgary, and let's say Toronto, TOR for Toronto. And in Vancouver, we've got a standard IP Office 500, V2. Calgary, the same thing. And of course, same thing in Toronto. Each of these sites is running IP phones. And that's kind of important because from a resiliency standpoint, digital phones clearly can't look to another site in the case that a site goes down because they are connected to a digital station module, which is part of the site that went down. So these are all IP phones.
So only IP phones can fail over, digital phones cannot.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Okay.
That's
so we have 3 separate cabinets. Site 1, Site 2, Site 3, they're all separately programmed,
Exactly.
all have their own information, all with IP phones in this picture.
Exactly, for
Okay.
sure. And very fortunately, our customer is attached through the internet. They've got either MPLS or maybe VPN, but we can say that each site has full visibility of one another. And that's kind of important because what I'd like to do is I'd like to devise a trunk from Vancouver to Toronto and from Calgary to Toronto and from Calgary to Vancouver. And the reason
why
why
are you doing all of these trunking?
Oh, it's a good question. Here, let me tell you why. So our voicemail server is going to be here in Toronto. And I'd like to, somewhere in the future, introduce a second voicemail server as well. But right now, I only have one voicemail server, and it's connected in Toronto. What I would kind of like happen here is if one of our sites should go down, if one of our links, say the link between Toronto and Calgary goes down, or the link between Toronto and Vancouver goes down, I would like for Toronto's phones to be able to fail over to a correct adjacent site. So say, for example, Vancouver here is closer geographically to Calgary, and maybe we've got a more reliable link between the two of them than we do between Vancouver and Toronto. I'd like for Vancouver's phones, let's just put a line number on this because it's easier for me. Line number here says.
So what does this mean, 90, 91, 92? What are you doing?
Oh, here, I'll explain. These phones here can each be set up to go to a specific line. So anywhere where we have a connection, we can say those phones could fail to. So in other words, because Calgary, has IP phones and it has licensing for them, Vancouver has licensing for IP phones and so does Toronto. In the case that Vancouver's system died for some reason, we can send each of these phones to either Toronto or Calgary or Toronto, depending on which line we set these phones up to, which gives us some nice geographic options because again, maybe our link to Toronto is too slow, so we're going to get too much jitter.
So this phone system over here can act as 100% failover for these handsets over here. This cabinet dies, all these phones can re-authenticate to that cabinet.
That's right, that's right. And they do that license free, which is nice. So Vancouver, these phones are all licensed to the Vancouver
Well, you
system.
need a networking license on each system in order to make this happen.
Exactly. But that's it. The phones otherwise authenticate to Calgary and they get loaded on by Calgary and held there until the Vancouver system's back in place again.
Right.
So the phones sit on your desktop and they still work properly, and yet the IP office for whatever reason is down. Even during an upgrade, the phones can authenticate to Calgary and keep your business going while you upgrade a system.
Got it.
Which is pretty remarkable. So the difference, of course, between creating one line and 2 lines is it gives us more choices as far as where we would.
So this system, Vancouver can fail to Calgary or it can fail to Toronto.
That's right. In fact,
and same thing with Toronto, can fail to Calgary or Vancouver. So all 3 sites can fail essentially to each other.
That's right.
And now that presumes that if you have a firewall here and this box dies, these handsets have lost connectivity to the outside world entirely. So if you've got a router in here.
But theoretically, your IP Office V2 is up at that time, right? So the handsets are still okay, and maybe even your local telco is okay, but you've lost connectivity to the voicemail server and you've lost connectivity to the other sites.
That's right. So as long as you have proper lines coming in, SIP trunks, PRI, analog lines, so this would be your lines.
Local PSTN. Yes.
Local PSTN. this phone system can operate independent. Now let's say, can we introduce voicemail to this equation? So let's say your voicemail really is that box right over there.
Yes.
What happens to voicemail for these users over here?
Well, these guys are gone because, again, we had a problem with their firewall, right? So they have no voicemail at the moment. Now, if we wanted to, we could introduce a second voicemail server. This functional marker. We could introduce a backup voicemail server to that particular system. So that system could have its own voicemail server that not only backs up this voicemail, we'll call them backup, but in the case that the link to the main voicemail server goes down, that system can talk to the backup voicemail.
Right. Okay. So you now have you really only have one voicemail system in your small community
That's
network.
right.
One voicemail fails, this one can act as a backup.
That's right.
But it's never really live. It only turns on or essentially becomes alive
Exactly.
once you have a problem. Now what happens with voicemail messages? So that's your primary, that dies, this becomes your backup. What happens to your voicemail messages when that turns back on?
They get proliferated back to the main one again.
Everything's already back there. Your voicemail message waiting lights work properly.
That's right.
All your voicemail messages are there, so you don't lose anything from a redundancy point of view.
That's correct. Yep.
Good.
It is about as good as it sounds. Now, if this guy goes out of the equation for some reason, then the Toronto system continues to be the host of voicemail, except Toronto talks to the voicemail server in Calgary.
Got it.
So as strange as it sounds, if either one of them go out, you're fine. The only way that we could possibly have a problem is if Calgary got completely disjoined from the small community network somehow.
But what difference would that make? Even if Calgary got disjoined, this system, so Vancouver, can still see the Toronto system.
Exactly. It's just Calgary would be out on their own in this case. So
Right.
it can't be perfect.
Got it.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm. Good. Okay. So I guess that wraps it up.
It does. So that is our resilience for 9.1 small community networking.
I'm Jeff,
I'm EJ.
and thanks for watching.
Thank you.